Rain hammered against the glass walls of Aerotech Corporation, a billion-dollar aerospace company perched high above downtown Seattle. The CEO, Emily Carson, stood by the window, arms crossed, frustration clouding her sharp blue eyes. The company's annual investor demonstration was just hours away, and their top pilot had suddenly fallen ill. The sleek prototype helicopter, a marvel of modern engineering, sat useless on the helipad. Meanwhile, down in the lobby, Jake Turner, the night janitor, pushed his mop along the marble floor. A quiet man in his late 40s, Jake rarely spoke more than a few polite words to anyone. But everyone knew he worked hard, never complained, and somehow always wore a calm smile. As Emily stormed into the lobby, barking orders into her phone, her eyes briefly met Jake's. "Rough day, ma'am?" he asked softly. Emily sighed. "You have no idea. My pilot just dropped out, and the whole demonstration depends on that flight. If we fail, the company loses millions." Jake hesitated, then said with a shy grin, "Maybe I could help." Emily gave a short laugh. "You fly a helicopter? Tell you what, if you can fly that thing, I'll marry you." The employees nearby chuckled. It was meant as a joke, a line thrown out in frustration. But Jake didn't laugh. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'll take you up on that, ma'am." Minutes later, a group of executives and engineers gathered on the rooftop, curiosity buzzing in the air. Jake walked toward the helicopter, his janitor's uniform flapping in the wind. Emily crossed her arms, still amused. But when Jake climbed into the cockpit, something changed. His hands moved with the confidence of a man who'd done this before. He checked the instruments, flipped the switches, and the helicopter roared to life. "What the—" Emily muttered, stepping closer. The rotor blades spun, slicing through the rain. Jake lifted the helicopter gracefully off the pad, hovering perfectly steady. Then, to everyone's shock, he took it into a smooth circle over the city skyline, before landing it gently right back where he'd started. When the engine went silent, no one said a word. Emily stared at him, speechless. How did you do that?" Jake smiled humbly. "Used to be a rescue pilot in the Navy. Lost my wife in an accident and, well, I needed a quieter life. Cleaning floors was all I could handle after that." The rooftop fell silent. Emily's sharp edges softened. For the first time, she saw the man, not the uniform. That evening, Emily found Jake still mopping the floors. "Just like nothing had happened. You saved the company today," she said quietly. The investors were thrilled. Jake shrugged. "Just did what needed to be done." Emily hesitated. "When I said I'd marry you if you flew that helicopter," Jake chuckled. "Don't worry, Mom. I knew you were joking." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I was. But I wasn't wrong about you being extraordinary." A few weeks later, Aerotech announced a new division, Veteran Support and Reintegration, dedicated to hiring and training military veterans in engineering and aviation. At the launch event, Jake stood beside Emily as a featured speaker, his humility and quiet courage inspiring everyone in the room. As the applause thundered through the hall, Emily leaned toward him and whispered, "You know, I wasn't kidding about that helicopter bet." Jake smiled, eyes glistening. "Then maybe it's time we took another flight." The night after the ceremony, Jake sat alone in his small apartment, looking out over the city lights. For years, he had lived in silence, surrounded by memories of his late wife and the life he thought he'd lost forever. But something had changed since that day on the rooftop. Emily's kindness, the laughter of the employees, and the purpose he found in helping others had stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years: hope. The next morning, as he walked into the sleek Aerotech building, the guards greeted him by name. People smiled and waved. For the first time, Jake felt seen. In the months that followed, he poured his heart into training new recruits, men and women who, like him, were searching for a second chance. He taught them not only about engines and aircraft, but about resilience, dignity, and the importance of never giving up. Emily often stopped by the training hangar, watching from a distance as Jake guided the veterans through every step. There was something grounding about his presence, He never sought recognition or praise, yet his quiet leadership began to shape the culture of the entire company. Aerotech started to feel less like a corporation and more like a community. One afternoon, after a successful flight demonstration by one of Jake's trainees, Emily invited him to dinner. They talked for hours, not about business, but about life, loss, and dreams. Emily learned how he had once saved dozens of lives during hurricane rescues, how he lost his wife when their helicopter crashed in a storm, and how he promised himself he'd never fly again. "Then why did you do it that day?" she asked softly. Jake looked down, thinking. "Because you needed someone to believe in you, and maybe I needed to believe in myself again." Emily reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "You did more than that, Jake. You reminded everyone here what courage looks like." As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened. They began taking small flights together, sometimes just hovering over the sunset-painted city. Those quiet moments became a healing space for both of them. Emily, who had built walls around her heart, started to open up. Jake, who thought his story had ended, found himself writing a new chapter. On a warm spring morning, Aerotech hosted its biggest event yet, a showcase of their new helicopter designed by a team of veterans under Jake's guidance. The crowd roared with pride as the machine took flight, cutting through the sky with elegance and strength. When Jake landed, the applause was deafening. Emily walked up to him, smiling in front of everyone. "Jake Turner," she said, her voice trembling just enough to show her heart. "You once told me you took that flight because I needed someone to believe in me. Well, today I want you to know I believe in you too." She took a deep breath and whispered the words that made the crowd fall silent. "And I meant what I said that day. If you fly this helicopter, I'll marry you." Jake froze, stunned, before breaking into a smile that reached his eyes. "Then, ma'am," he said with a quiet laugh, "let's take one last flight." As the helicopter lifted into the bright blue sky, the crowd below erupted in cheers. It wasn't just a flight, it was a symbol of redemption, love, and second chances. From that day forward, people spoke about Jake and Emily's story not as a corporate miracle, but as proof that sometimes the most extraordinary souls are found in the most ordinary places. And sometimes all it takes is one act of faith, a single moment of courage to change everything. Because love, like flight, always begins with a leap.